I'm not sure. We'll see.
We do have things today. So I lost my notes last meeting. I took notes on a paper and I lost that paper. That's what happens with the analog world. But I think that I got everything in that I was supposed to. I worked on getting on excluding the underscore format, and
Yep,
that was merged. And well, actually, this is not merged yet. I didn't merge it. I wanted to get a couple of eyes on it, but then on top of that, I built the accept format enhancement that we discussed. So if clients provide the accept format, they will get errors that happen before route negotiation also as a JSON API format, serialized like those. But if not, it's fine. They are only missing 404s and maybe some route level 403s. As we discussed, I think that should be pretty close because it wasn't actually all that complex, and it's mostly based on your patch. The only thing is that as current things stand, we get the HTML format by default if there is no format, right? So one of the things that we are doing is we are using, or we are setting on the route filter the format if we detect that there was no format passed. Therefore, if we detect that the format is HTML on a JSON API route. I think it's fine because it's it's a JSON API route. But if someone kind of wants to force underscore format equals HTML, they won't, because there is no way of knowing if that happened or no format at all was added, except if we inspect the query string parameter, which I believe is not best practice here, because you could set the format in different ways. But unless core is fixed in allowing no, if no format is negotiated, and then letting each route decide, which I don't think it's going to happen, we cannot do much about that.
Well, actually, I've been working on that, and so I posted 2 core patches. One is already merged, but the other one is more important and is a thing that will really bring this ability. Unfortunately, in doing so, I think, well, in my opinion, and as far as I can tell, I researched it as far as I could. Due to the design of Symfony, it is actually going to be impossible to solve it in core. So that you could specify underscore format in your route requirements and then have that be applied automatically and so on. Plus, it will run too late still. But even the case where you're requesting something that exists and you don't get a 403 or 404 before the routing happens, even then it will not work out. But Daniel Wehner saw a way that he thought it could still work, so he proposed a pull request to the Symfony project. He got it merged in the last 24 hours.
But
yes, but I think it still doesn't solve it, and I think it introduces more problems than it solves, unfortunately. I think it can cause page cache corruption and so on. So I'm personally not convinced. So I agree that I don't think we can wait for this to be fixed in core. That's a long version. The short version is I agree it can be fixed in core because Symfony is not designed to support this. Symfony is designed to only support format negotiation via the accept header or via the extension in the URL or via question mark underscore formats equals something. So I agree. As far as I can tell, we cannot fix it.
I think it's fine. I mean,
yes, I think it's okay
trying to force HTML. I mean, sorry. That's
yeah, well, this route simply, you can set format whatever, format bananas, format blah, blah, and you will always still get JSON API. That's it.
Yeah, well, the difference is that if you set underscore, I don't know, JSON or half JSON, you will get back a 406, right? It's like, no, you cannot do this here. But with underscore HTML, we just can't.
Yeah, that's such a small edge case, and it's really an internal, like, it's annoying for us PHP developers and for the people seeing the internals of this code, but it results in making more sense for the actual end users, which are those interacting with the REST or the HTTP API of the JSON API module. So I think that's okay.
Cool. So yeah,
But I did
there's
post a few comments about some of the smaller concerns I have with your patch.
okay. Cool.
There were a few things I didn't quite understand why you're changing them, but maybe there's a simple answer to them. So it's nothing big, basically.
I haven't had the chance to look at that. Apart from that, I've been merging quite a lot of stuff. I know that there is an RTBC ticket. I think it's about removing the error handler.
No,
no, that one was merged already.
yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's fine. It's about moving some logic out of the request handler class into a response subscriber, which is just how the REST module does it in core, and it results in things like page cache and dynamic page cache working correctly with JSON API responses.
All right. Oh, it wasn't working correctly? I had the impression that it did. Cool. So yeah, basically that and some of those that talk about test coverage, and then I did a very tedious but much needed triage on the issue queue, and so I believe that many of the issues that are outstanding right now are documentation or tests.
Yes, I agree.
So hopefully there are not many bugs at the moment or feature requests, because we are kind of, I would say that we are close to that, with one exception, and that is Next. I want to just remain a little bit open for revisions, but yeah, that's my impression, that we're kind of close, I would say.
I agree. Yeah, I think that the one thing that should land before you tag a first beta release is the format one. So always returning API JSON. That's the only big remaining change, and I think everything else is just bug fixing or adding new capabilities, and neither of those should result in actual functional changes. So no code should break. So I think once that one issue is in, when we were talking about length earlier, I think then is the time for a beta, to be honest.
Cool. Yeah, totally agree.
I hope to be able to work on expanding the test coverage significantly over the coming weeks and maybe even months, and that will undoubtedly uncover some bugs. Like, there's always bugs in software, but hopefully nothing too big. But that will help us be more confident about current code. But this is the beauty about JSON API, the module on the spec. The module can just comply with the spec, and that's it. Like, it's not like the REST module where there's so many choices to make. JSON API module will also be impacted by the decisions and changes how a certain field is normalized, but that's it basically. In the REST module, there's so much more that might change and it might be broken and so on and so on. In JSON API module, it's far less the case. So
I would say that we are less impacted as well. Yeah. One of the things is like today's bug fix, which was about serializing correctly integers and booleans. It is kind of, in order to write a functional test, we need the core patch. In order to have the core patch applied, we need to make it a requirement. And I don't know if we're gonna have the ability to force
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? What is required to write these functional tests, you say?
So in order to get the serialization right, we need to call the serializer, and the serialization of scalars is deferred to the serialization module, right? And before that, we were just doing a to array to serialize the content of the field. So, sorry, the field item. Now, thanks to this patch, and thank you about that. By the way, I see that you joined. Thanks to this patch, we can leverage these new normalizers, and I believe that these normalizers are fairly new. So that means, or the serializer for scalars, fairly new. So that means that if we add a functional test to make sure that we are normalized, or we are serializing as a Boolean, for instance, in my machine it will fail because I don't have like the bleeding edge version of core.
Oh,
Right?
I see what you're
And
saying.
the same thing
Yes.
for the test bot,
Yes.
and
Okay.
it's going to be very cumbersome. I would say that we just don't test what is supposed to be tested in core, which is that the serializers work as they are supposed to.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, I commented on the issue as well, also saying that we shouldn't block the bug fix itself from requiring test coverage. And I didn't even think about this part, but regardless of us depending on a specific version of core in order for the tests to pass, even regardless of that, we don't have this kind of functional test coverage yet that is asserting the actual response bodies. And I don't think we need to hold up this simple, small issue on adding all that test coverage. So I agree, even just from that perspective. But are you saying that we should never add test coverage for response bodies? Because that I'm not sure I agree with.
No. I was saying that for this
For
particular
now,
issue,
yes, yeah,
like
totally.
we cannot make
Yeah, you have to
sure
wait.
that the core version is the one that we have in the test bot, and then we need to go and check. Oh, it's this test that failed.
Yeah.
So for that, I would just say skip tests. I have a minor concern about the way that we're doing the serialization in that patch, but I will post that in the issue. I was more interested in your take on the skip the testing for this thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I hope to be able to find a time to write test coverage similar to the REST modules test coverage that I worked on for a really long time, that has solved or has helped us find many problems and is helping to prevent new problems from being introduced. But on a much smaller scale, because in the case of JSON API, we don't need to test many different formats. So that's already a large bit of complexity that is simply gone. So hopefully the test will be much easier, much more maintainable. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm sure of that, and hopefully we can just punt the authorization part, or at least simplify it, because it should not be. There is nothing different at all in. I mean, there is nothing special at all in how JSON API is dealing with that. So
yeah, I think we could get away indeed with not testing the authentication bit, because that's already tested in REST, and in REST it is necessary that something is testing how a particular authentication mechanism, so basic auth versus cookie versus something else, how that is impacted or impacts a particular format, because there have been bugs, like specifically basic auth plus HEL JSON, for example, behave differently than basic auth and JSON. Like, it's crazy, but it's possible. But that's something then we don't need to test again, because core REST is already testing it.
exactly. The only thing that I'm a bit hesitant is, for some reason, I have been just hoping that, because I don't know how the CSRF protection works internally, so I was hoping that it would be solved, but there is no test asserting that, and we should definitely have some tests.
Okay, you mean in JSON API?
In JSON API, yes.
Okay, so you want to test JSON API with the cookie authentication mechanism, it sounds like, because CSRF is only relevant for the cookie mechanism. Okay.
Yeah, that's why I was bringing it up during the authentication part of the conversation. That is the only thing that I could see as maybe we should just test it, or we should do the manual test and see. Oh, it's not a problem, because it's just my insecurity not knowing how the internals of the actual implementation in core is.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm afraid that might be a security issue in the current module, but it's an alpha, so we don't need a security release to fix it.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'll actually, let me write it down so I work on that later today, or as soon as possible in any case.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay that we discuss it here. In alpha releases, you can discuss them publicly.
Exactly.
So there is that, and yeah, I mean, there are some tests on the response bodies, but there are like
high-level structure.
Yeah, handpicked tests, because I kind of assumed that the data model is not set in stone, and it would be like a burden to, keep rechecking everything. And to be honest, doing assertions on a JSON serialization on a string can be a pain in the ass, especially if there is no guaranteed order on keys.
Yeah, that's why the core REST test coverage is actually testing not on the serialized output itself, but on the normalized output. So just decode, but not deserialize. But yeah, otherwise that would be total insanity. That would be impossible, I think. Even.
But yeah, those were the main drivers. I mean, the fact that I'm not just dumping two different arrays and comparing them is not because I think it's a bad idea. So if you think that we should just adapt those tests, and instead of manually choosing some properties that I thought by the time that were interesting to assert, we want to assert the whole payload, that should be fairly easy.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well. Yeah, to basically do something with static files that contain the entire expected JSON API response. That would be the ideal thing, because that is very simple to maintain and very simple to replay, even to test in your own environment, that sort of thing. But I'm not sure. I can't promise that will be possible. But because we don't need to support a zillion different formats like the core REST module needs to, it is possible that we are able to simplify it that far. So I will try to make it happen.
Yeah, when working on Node projects, what I've been doing is I keep JSON version of the thing, and then I can just parse it and compare. So plus one to that, yeah. Cool. What's the other thing that I had? And revisions. Revisions. So I was thinking about revisions, and I'm not 100% sure I'm fine with not having any kind of support on JSON API. Like, I would be okay not being able to write on the revisioning system, like alter a past revision of sorts, or remove a past revision. I'm fine with not having that, but I think we should have like some sort of a way of getting the old revisions for a given entity,
and be able to create a new one. I think.
Right, by doing a regular post. If the
batch, I think, right? Post is.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So basically, patching the entity will cause a new revision to be created for that entity.
Yeah.
Okay.
If opt-in, I would say, like the entity forms, work with the checkbox, create new revision. I'm not sure how that would work, but that should be like the standard way of updating an entity. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about that. I would assume that Core would handle that for us, the entity API.
I'm not sure about that though.
Okay, that was
it's
an assumption that I was making.
Yeah, there's a reason Core REST doesn't support revisions yet either, precisely because, well, nobody has worked on it yet is probably the biggest reason. But also, yeah, revisions are kind of a special thing in Drupal, because from a JSON API perspective, I think you would expect that every revision has its own UUID. I think that would be fair to assume. That's also what relaxed web services does, I think, if I remember correctly. That's also how relaxed web services is able to give you CouchDB and PouchDB integration, so that you can automatically sync revisions between instances. I think lullabot.com actually uses this approach. I think it uses PouchDB. But core Drupal, it doesn't have any identification of revisions other than a sequential identifier. So that's kind of a problem. So that's also my main question here. Does a JSON API specification or any of its extensions support this kind of data model that Drupal has for it?
I don't think so. I mean, we are kind of going on our own, and I kind of liked the idea of just like we have the related and relationship endpoints on a given entity, we could have a revision list. And we could do just /revision list and either output multi-response, like a multi-part response, like Dixon was proposing, or just do a plain collection, just like the related structures the response in as a plain collection. The problem with that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. What's the problem with that?
The problem with that is that for it to comply to the schema, we would need to have a type and an ID for each of the items. And the ID is kind of problematic because, in this case, the ID would mean a different thing. It's not the entity ID in every other place. In this case, it would be the revision ID. So kind of, I'm on the fence in here. I almost prefer the multi-response, the multi-part response, because it allows us to just serialize the entity and give multiple responses, as if you were making one call per revision, and then you get everything in there. It's special. It's Drupal only. It's just an extension.
Yeah. So do you think revision support is something that needs to be in the first release of JSON API, or do you think it can be a feature that we add later on?
We can add it later on. I mean, if we think that no APIs need to be updated for this to happen, I would just, not think about this.
Okay.
I'm just, this idea is too fresh in my mind to be certain that we will not need any APIs to change.
Yeah, maybe it's good then to experiment a little bit to see whether we can say with more certainty that it would or would not require changes. I don't think it will require changes from the perspective that you have another link relation. That's fine, adding a new link relation, and then there's a new endpoint, a new HTTP resource that you can talk to. That's fine too. The one thing where I think that we could run into problems is the clients, because the clients up until that point, we'll always have assumed that the ID is a UUID, always. The ID field in JSON API will always be a UUID, and then we will need to do something different. I suspect maybe something like the UUID dash revision ID, something like that, but that's a very custom thing, so I'm not convinced about that either. But how to deal with the ID of a revision, I think that will be the one thing that could cause clients to say, what the hell?
So there is something in the multi-part that is, you basically, I know how familiar is everyone with this, you basically have a separator, like you have an HTTP document back with your headers and your body, but the body is like a fractal of this HTTP response, right? You have sections, and every section is a valid HTTP document. And you have the headers and the body. And in the headers, you can specify for each of these small responses, you can specify what is called the content ID for that response, which is, it's used for different things. If you have like hierarchical responses, it is used to convey this hierarchy, etc. But for us, it could mean that we can have the revision UUID as this content ID there, and then the payload contains the body contains the entity ID, and it's just a valid entity, but just in a parallel dimension or back in time, or however you wanna call it. But it's just the response that you had gotten if you had made the request when that was the latest revision. And in the latest revision, you would get the entity ID. So that's what you get, the entity ID. And the revision UUID only comes like in a header of these sub responses. But let's just not talk too much about the implementation detail.
Yeah.
Just wondering if this is a good idea to do before, after, or maybe
I think actually the more I think about this, I think after is fine, simply because the one concern that I have is the parsing, the way that clients deal with IDs, JSON API IDs, and they're always UUIDs except in this area, except when dealing with revisions. But that is really, like, not every client will even want to use revisions. So it's fine for them to add the ability to distinguish between revision IDs and everything else IDs. So if that's the only concern, I think that means that it's entirely okay to do it later.
Would you agree that this is the feature set that we want in the midterm?
Yes, mid or long term. Like, I don't think it's something we need right now.
Right. Okay. I was thinking more on the idea that what if we also want to be able to delete revisions via JSON API and things like that? I discarded that, but maybe that was the wrong call.
Yeah, that's true. So the main reason actually that so there's two main reasons I would say we can do this later. The first is I think it's something that can be entirely additive and it wouldn't break anything. That's the most important one. The second reason is that having worked now on the REST API for about a year and fixing it and so on, I have not seen one request, I think, one person complaining that we don't support revisions. So the need for it is much, much lower than anything else.
Cool.
In my experience so far.
Right, and there are other country projects that are covering that spectrum of of needs.
Yes.
Right? If someone really needs revisions, they could just maybe check the basic feature set that JSON API may come with in the future, or just use something fancier or more focused to that.
Yes.
Like relaxed. Okay. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, we just should be careful not spending so much time on something that in the end almost nobody will use. And maybe at some point there will be lots of people who want to use this, but then we can worry about it at that point. So yeah, that's I think what makes sense.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Sorry. My mind went to revisionable entity references and paragraphs and field collection. Yeah. That is another nest that's gonna probably happen. But yeah, I would argue that paragraphs are for a presentation reason, and maybe shouldn't be part of your data model. Anyways, cool. Wow,
okay, so
there was a lot. It was dense.
Yes, it was.
Please go ahead. I'm done.
I just wanted to say, I think we covered everything we wanted to cover, the JSON API format stuff, so not having to specify !_ format equals API JSON. That is moving forward, so yay. The other big issue there, the error handler stuff that landed. Another issue there that is a follow-up that simplifies things and makes things work better with page cache and dynamic page cache is RTBC, but is currently waiting for tests to pass, but should should pass tests. And we agreed that revision stuff is for later because it shouldn't break anything and nobody is really requesting it or begging for it and that sort of thing. And I think we agreed that we think once the format stuff is in, that we can tag a beta release. So,
cool. Yeah, sounds like a plan. And maybe someday, probably in Baltimore, we can have like the really hard discussion on should we support versioning of the API? Is Drupal capable?
But I don't want to think about that for now.
That's for another time. Yes, but that's kind of one of the things I'm buried doing triage. I think that some more things may be closed, but that's how far I got with doing my triage.
Yep. So, yeah, there was a lot of issues that were updated, so that's good.
At least we are in a single page now of issues.
Yes.
Cool. Wow, this was great. A lot of stuff. And it feels like we are making so much progress in really getting close.
Yes, I agree.
Better. Wow. Yeah. Cool. So not sure if anyone else has anything to add.
No, thanks for just listening in.
All right. Cool. Then we almost made it to half, to 4.5, at least here in my clock. A little bit longer than that, but we started late. So anyways, have a nice week, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. I think next week it's like the open, the one that is with more people and more projects. Am I wrong? Yes, I'm wrong.
It's the 20th.
Yeah. Okay, so next week, same time.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.